Now let's look at the next really important thing about your experience in Maya, and that's moving yourself around, or your point of view at any rate, and manipulating objects, just at a basic level. So back to the scene with the Homo erectus calvarium here, you can see that it seems like I'm either moving myself or I'm moving the skull. In fact, I'm moving myself. So each one of these views, the viewports, represents the view from a camera. So if we open the outliner, we can see that there's a perspective camera, and that's this one here, a top camera, front camera, side camera, and we can make new cameras if it's needed later on. But these are the basic cameras that every Maya scene will open with. Now it's important to know the difference between these types of cameras, and one is a perspective camera like this one here, where we can navigate around and tumble around. We can zoom in and zoom out. Sorry, we're not zooming, we're dollying in and dollying out, and we can track back and forth. So we're actually moving our point of view. We're moving the perspective camera when we do this. We're not moving the object. And maybe this is easier to see if we turn on the grid in the scene. So there's a little shortcut for that here. So you can see we're not moving the object, we're moving our point of view. So that's in a perspective view. These other views, top, front, and side, are what are called orthographic views. So we have not a fixed point of view, but a non-rotating point of view. So the top always looks down from the top. You can dolly in and dolly out to get closer and farther away, and you can track around. But you can't tumble. If I try to, it says orthographic views cannot be tumbled, because these are fixed rotation cameras. So how am I achieving all of this stuff? Well, it's simple. To navigate around in Maya, you need both hands. You have to hold down the Alt key with one hand, and then with your mouse, if you want to tumble around in the perspective view, for example, well, the only one where you can tumble is a perspective camera. You hold down Alt and you use the left mouse button to tumble around. Now I'm on a Windows PC, so it might be different on the Mac. Actually, I go between both of them and I'm always confused. It's either Alt or Command that will do that on the Mac. And now if you want to dolly in and dolly out, that's Alt held down and then right mouse button. Can do this. So this is called dollying in and dollying out rather than zooming in and zooming out, because it's actually the position of the camera is moving rather than the focal length of the lens. Then if you want to track back and forth as if you were sidestepping or going up and down, that's Alt held down with the middle mouse button. So you need a 3-button mouse to really work in Maya. So you can do those same things here except for tumbling. So I can dolly in and dolly out, I can track, but I can't tumble. And you'll also notice that these look a little different. The orthographic views have no perspective distortion, so the brow ridges here against the back of the skull, everything looks sort of flattened out. That's because it's not simulating a curved lens camera like your eye or a regular real-world camera would. Here's another camera in my scene, so cameras actually show up in the scene as objects themselves. So those are the basics of how to move around your scene. Now if you get lost in the scene, like if you get moved way out here, if you want to go back in and get a close-up on all the objects in your scene, you can hit A and your view will pop in to show everything. If you hit F, it will frame whatever you have selected. So selecting, how do you select things? Well, you can just drag on them or just click on them. You can click on them in the outliner. I've got a certain thing turned on right now. I'm just going to turn that off. Just ignore that. But if I can click on it here, you can see it's the same object, so it's selected everywhere. It shows up highlighted in green like this, showing all the edges in green. And select it here. You can marquee select. If you have more than one object, let's say I have the skull and this cube, which I'm using as a scale. It's a 1 centimeter cube. If I want to select more than one object, I can marquee select around both of them, or all of them if there's more than just two. Or I can click on one, then hold down Shift and click on another. Now the Shift thing is a little tricky. Well, it's not tricky, but there's a little bit more to it. So if I have the cube selected, and if I hold down Shift and drag over both of them, so right now the skull is not selected and the cube is. If I drag over them with Shift held down, it reverses my selection, so it's a toggle. So now it's selected the unselected thing and deselected the previously selected thing. So another way to modify your selection is to hold down Control Shift, and that will just add to your selection. So it's not a toggle anymore. It just adds to your selection. Even if you mouse over something that is previously selected, it won't deselect it. And pardon me. And then if you just hold down Control and select something, it will deselect that. And it's not a toggle. Okay, minor thing, but this is, and being able to select things appropriately is a useful thing to do when you get started. So that's how you move your point of view. That's how you select objects. Now, how do you move objects? Well, let's take this cube just to make it easier. And over here you've got a bunch of tools that allow you to move things. Now the first one, this is called the toolbox, by the way. You've got a selection arrow, so it just allows you to select things. But you can select when you've got these other things activated too. You've got a marquee select tool here, so you can draw around shapes if you have to be precise. A paint select, and this is for selecting components, which we'll talk about in the next video. I'm going to go back into object mode. And there is now, these three are important. So this is the translate. So you can use it to move an object around. So you can see that you can grab one of these arrows and move it along this axis, or that axis, or the other. So the green arrow is the y-axis, the red arrow is the x-axis, and the blue arrow is the z-axis. We'll talk more about that later. So if you grab the arrows, it will lock to whatever axis you have chosen. If you grab the middle, you can freely move it around in this square in the middle here. If you grab one of these free-floating flat planes, that will lock to the two nearby axes. So if I select this one, it's going to lock it to Y and Z, or Z. Same thing here. If I hit this button, I'll go into rotate mode, and it works in the same way. You can either use the axes to rotate or just select in the middle, and you can free rotate. Now this might be a non-default setting where you're allowed to free rotate here. If I reset my tool, nope, free rotate is by default turned on. And then if I go over here, I can scale. So grabbing the middle will scale uniformly. Grabbing the outer cubes will scale non-uniformly along the axis. And the same thing, you can use these planes to do it too. Now the thing is, nobody ever really uses this toolbox for much because there are much better shortcuts for this. Q will go to selection arrow, W will go to translate, E will go to rotate, and R will go to scale. Why they didn't use R for rotate, I'll never know, but there's probably a good or at least a historic reason that they don't want to change, but you'll get used to it. The last thing I want to say is there are different view modes. Everything right now is all shaded and nice. If you hit 4 on the keyboard, you'll go into wireframe mode, so you can see inside the structure and the structure of the edges. If you hit 5 on the keyboard, you'll go into shaded mode, and then 6 and 7 also show shaded mode, but 6 will show any textures that are on the surface. We'll look at this later. And 7 will show lighting mode. I don't have any lights in the scene, so there's nothing to see. And there you go. So now you can move yourself and objects.